Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz or at Banking Day. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from our website, leongettler.com. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. This is episode number 19 in our series for 2024, and today's date is Friday, June the 7th. First, I'll be talking to Prakash Ramamurthy, Chief Product Officer at Freshworks, and he'll talk about how Freshworks is helping business sales teams use AI effectively. And I'll talk to Rabobank economist Michael Every about what's happening with the economy of our biggest trading partner, China. But first, let's talk to Prakash Ramamurthy.
Prakash, tell us about Freshworks.
Yeah, Freshworks is a cloud-native software company that provides software as a service along two pillars. One for customer-facing solutions and then an employee-facing solution. For customer-facing, we have customer support, Salesforce automation and marketing automation, all integrated into a single unified suite. And from an employee-facing perspective, we have ITSM, ESM, and ITOM capabilities, which are suitable for employee self-service and providing ability to monitor your applications and so on and so forth. So those are the broad pillars of capabilities that we have at Freshworks. And our ethos is our products are easy to use. Our end users like it, whether it is a customer support agent or an IT agent or an employee trying to use for self-service, and it's quick to deploy, and we have one of the lowest cost of ownership, and all brought together with modern technology and state-of-the-art solution. And we're going to talk about AI, how it's making it even better, but that's our value proposition. That's our premise, which is bring out modern, sophisticated software, but don't charge arm and a leg, and don't take forever and 5 days to deploy.
So how is your AI helping businesses?
A couple of ways, right? First off, if you look at it at the broadest level, I just want to make sure I state the mission of AI from Freshworks perspective, which is all AI work that we do and the output that we produce is of supervisory nature. What I mean by that is this, which is we will make it easy for the users who are using our software to use AI, but at the end of the day, whatever work product that AI produces will be determined by the end user, whether they want to consume it, whether they want to send it to the customer or not, right? So I just want people to understand, because there's a lot of things around AI's accuracy and everything else, and I don't want people to think that it's kind of some kind of runaway experiment that runs out of control, right? It all runs in a supervisory mode. So where do we use AI? Our ethos, I said briefly in my opening remarks that, hey, our software is easy for our agents to use, easy for end users to use. AI is deployed along those lines. How do we make it easy for people who are using your software to benefit from it? I'll give you a very simple example, right? If you're a customer support agent, you're chatting with a bunch of customers. Usually, if you're an agent, you're having 5 or 6 conversations you're expected to keep running in parallel, right? That is because it's asynchronous. You keep those threads running. So the way you respond back to the customer, depending on their sentiment, their angst and everything else, needs to be perfect, right? It needs to be more empathetic. So even helping our agent be able to take some basic sentences and rephrase it in a more benevolent fashion is a productivity help, right? That's the most basic thing that we do. But we do more sophisticated things where we want to use our AI capabilities to run against the data that we have and collect insights and make it available for our agents and our administrators. What do I mean by that? If I am a customer support person, I'm interacting with somebody, I should get, after I complete a conversation, I should get an update saying, hey, this is the quality score for you. You did well on sentiment. You didn't do so great on crisply answering the question, and so on and so forth. So for us, AI is an enabler for our end users. It's an enabler for our administrators. That's how we perceive that. And it runs across the gamut. It's kind of foundational for all our product lines.
What are the key issues that you as a software provider seek to address for your customers?
Through AI or in general?
Well, through AI.
Look, there is a couple of things, right? One, every product collects a lot of data. Very few provide insights, right? So that is one of the primary things we're trying to do. We want to provide insights through AI. That's number one. Number two, look at it this way, right? We want to radically change the way people interact with software. When you look at it, Leon, when your brain thinks about something, it thinks about it in a linear fashion where you want to articulate what you want to do. Hey, I want somebody to get me a new computer because my computer isn't working. That's how you think as an employee. You don't think of it like I got to go to this page, fill out this form. That's not how the human brain thinks. So how do we use AI to change the paradigm in which our end users interact with our software? Right? That's another area where we're investing in. So inside AI first product interaction, those are some of the areas where we are investing in right now. Outside of the fact that we want to have nifty little places where we make AI be augmenting our agents, our admins to be able to do their jobs better.
You've recently announced new GPT-based conversational enhancements. So can you share more about these enhancements?
Yeah, absolutely. Say, I'll give you a couple of examples. Right? I just gave you one early on about paraphrasing a response back to a customer. If an agent wants to send a response back and he or she just puts a skeleton of it, you can say rephrase it. It'll go to it'll use the GPT API, get it more rephrased, and then the agent can look at it before they send it off to the customer. And that's a very common use case that we went live with. Another one is this, which is many times I'm sure you would have done this. You're talking to an agent and you're not getting the answer you want to hear. You would say, hey, can I talk to your manager? Or when you're chatting with them, you want to say, hey, I know this is what you think the policy is, but I want to talk to your manager. But let's say you've been having a conversation with the agent over the last 15 minutes, and you now want to transfer to your manager, and the agent has to now type everything to the manager, or the agent can say, summarize, and we use GPT to summarize the entire conversation into 5 or 6 bullets as a private note, so that the supervisor sees everything in context and within a few minutes knows what it is about, so that they can respond better to the customer. So that's just another example. So we have a dozen little examples like this that we have developed. For example, in marketing, one of the biggest challenges in marketing is email open rates when you send out a marketing campaign, right? And the subject header a lot of times drives people's attention. So how do you use GPT to create a more compelling subject header based on the tone and the sentiment you want to use in those email campaigns? That's another thing, right? Another one is to be able to create FAQs based on customer questions that are coming in and the answers that the agents are giving. So there's a dozen little things like this we just went live with, and we're working on a lot more things where we want to fundamentally change the way people interact with our software.
Right, okay. So how will generative AI and ChatGPT revolutionize customer and employee experience?
It will make the agents be more productive. It'll make the employees be able to get all the services that they need in their channels of choice, whether it's Slack or Teams or whatever it is. It'll make interactions with software more intuitive. Therefore, it makes everybody more productive all around, whether it is the agents, whether it's the employees, people who are requesting services and people who are delivering services in the customer service world, whether it's employee or end customers. The whole process gets better because AI brings the right insights. It guides the agent on what the right next best action is, and and it helps them interact with the information that they can be brought to bear in a more productive fashion. That's how I think things are going to be fundamentally better going forward, because it will make us use software the way we think instead of how the way the software is being designed. So I say, we are going to move more to conversations, not clicks. When you use software today, you click your way through software all the time.
You create real interaction.
Exactly.
And real conversations.
Yeah, like you and I are talking, right? I mean, we are exchanging information. We are not doing it through clicks. That's not how humans think and behave.
Right,
but software makes us turn it into that. For example, if you're a customer support supervisor, what is the first thing you want to know? Hey, how is my average handle time today? How is my, that's what you think. You do not go and say, hey, how do I go select this filter, apply this between these dates? That's not how humans think. But now, today you have to think in a certain way, and then you have to translate it into clicks to get the answer you want.
Right, yes, yeah, of course.
But AI is going to make it conversational. And more importantly, AI is going to tell you, Leon, these are your top 3 problems. you don't need to divine what the problem is and then go search for the answer. I am going to tell you what the three problems are. You should focus on after you go get your cup of coffee. That's how it's going to transform it.
Well, that'll make a much better workplace and a much better business, I would think.
That's for sure.
Well, Prakash, thank you very much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks for giving me the chance.
And now let's talk to Rabobank economist Michael Every.
Well, Michael, the Chinese economy is bedeviled with problems. We've discussed this. The country is suffering from slowing economic growth, stagnating productivity, a malfunctioning property sector, the misallocation and inefficient use of capital. There's debt and weak household income and consumer demand. But what isn't clear is how Beijing should fix these problems. So what's your view about this?
Well, I'm glad you've read out that list, because usually it's me who lists them and you who start with a more kind of optimistic kind of bent. The issue is now, I think that's not the right way to be looking at the problem at all, because even though we have seen, better data of late, and the IMF have just upgraded their expectation of growth for the year back to around 5%, and we are seeing Beijing starting to ask some questions about, how it can stabilize the property market. It's talking about socializing the whole thing, by the way, how they can try and boost consumer spending a little bit at the margin. Overall, the message from Beijing is still clear. They're quite happy with it the way it is. They know they've got these problems. They're not prepared to adopt any of the consumer-friendly, spend like crazy, here's a stimulus check, go and get another credit card, let's juice house prices, kind of nonsense that the West has been addicted to for decades to our detriment. And instead, what they are doing, and you have to look at this flip side, they are producing, or they have an economy which is producing a mind-blowing quantity of goods with which they are flooding the entire world. Everywhere you look, product sector after product sector is being dominated by Chinese producers, which is the flip side of having very weak consumption. And they are deindustrializing country after country, sector after sector, and emerging as, literally the go-to guys for just about anything that you need for a green transition, or in the future to even just drive. And after they've done that, of course, they'll move on to planes, they'll move on to whatever. If you're China, in which way is this bad? They simply don't care that consumers aren't out there spending a go-go, because that's never been their goal. They only need enough consumer spending to keep things stable. And if you can say, well, you're gradually becoming the main or only producer of everything, which cements your global power and role in the entire global economy, where's the downside? So my answer is they're not going to try and fix it. Not in terms of maybe how you're conceiving it in its totality.
This focus on industrial policy is boosting what I believe the CCP calls it new productive forces. So they're trying to flood the world with scientific and technological tools such as batteries and industrial machinery, semiconductors, computing, artificial intelligence, robotics, all of that stuff, pharmaceuticals. But can that actually work? Because China's no doubt the world's leading manufacturing nation, but it can't create a climate of economic innovation with all those rigid politics and governance and exclusionary approach to institutional building.
No, it can't. But what it can do is three things. Number one, it can throw unlimited money at the problem, which doesn't work that well, but can get some effect inefficiently. Number two, it can steal all that IP, and it does that all the time, even though, of course, they deny it. Or number three, and more normally, they can get idiot Western companies who don't understand anything about the real world to go there and transfer the fruits of generations of Western R&D, much of which was paid for by the Western taxpayer indirectly, and then give that all to China for free for a short-term bump to their profits and a nice golden parachute and handshake for the CEO, following which, of course, China will cannibalize it and then bankrupt that company and sell everything back to them in the West cheaper a few years from now. But hey, the CEO has bought himself a beachfront property, so who cares? So following those three techniques, China can stay ahead of the game and is staying ahead of the game, and the West is doing everything it can to help them.
The problems with this new economic strategy is things remain unclear. I mean, how will it be financed? And you've got all these local governments that are in China that are financially strapped.
That's true, absolutely. They have a staggering level of debt in the local government sector, which de facto, of course, will be the central government, which de facto, of course, will be the central bank. So we're seeing the underlying inefficiency of the system. But as I said, we have an underlying inefficient system in China, which on the other hand is producing a vast quantity of stuff, which is dominating world markets, and means that at the drop of a hat, they can produce as much of anything as they need. And that has consumer implications, industrial implications, and let me be blunt, military implications. So it's a pretty handy trick to have in your back pocket. What do we have in the West? And I'm including Australia in this, but not only Australia. We have a staggering degree of debt, and we have economies that don't produce anything except higher house prices. So who's actually got the better bad model? They're both bad models if you want to be sustainable in the long run. But if you're going to put the two against each other head to head, which one would you rather have? A dynamic liberal Western system which produces innovation, which we then give to China for free because somebody gets to have a beachfront property and overpriced property and we don't make anything else, or a system which also has too much debt, also can't balance itself out, but in the interim is able to produce more than enough stuff to actually dominate the real economy of others, and if necessary, if push comes to shove, to outproduce them on every kind of military good.
But the issue is that all these firms in China will receive substantially greater subsidies and other forms of state aid compared with their peers elsewhere.
So?
That requires Chinese government to give even more money to go into even more debt.
So?
Well, that's not a good economic model.
I just described that it is not a good economic model when you produce everything the world needs and they're reliant on you. And were you to turn the taps off, they're absolutely stuck. Who cares about digits on a screen and debt? Now, they are now actually trying to clamp down on the worst excesses of it. For example, in the housing market, they don't want crazy mortgage loans. In Australia, if you had crazy mortgage loans again, no one would blink. No one would blink. If your regulator started to say, right, we'll lend 10 times earnings to everybody, etc., all you get is headlines saying how rosy it is that house prices are picking up and it's juicing the economy and tradies are doing it well, right? That's not a good economic model either, but you produce nothing of any value. China, at least, is producing an enormous amount of value.
I would agree to some point, but China's top-down style of governance and its status economic philosophy and its preponderance of corruption means that a great deal of this investment is likely to end up in, well, waste and loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have our own corruption. We have our own staggering waste, if you look at some of these bubbles that we blow on a serial basis in the West. And at the end of the day, the proof of the pudding is in the production. It's in how many puddings you make that can be eaten. And actually the West at the moment, our economic model, and it doesn't please me to say this, I'm not rubbing my hands or reveling in this, I want to make it abundantly clear, but the West's economic model doesn't produce anything and China's does. It doesn't mean China's got a good model. I've made that abundantly clear, but neither do we. And when you rub the two up against each other and friction and sparks arise, which is what we're seeing, which one of the two is made of harder stuff or, stronger stuff? And it's going to be the one that can produce. So you ask me where the model is going to break down, or you're implying that it's not in any of the mechanisms you're describing. It's not going to internally suddenly say, that's it, we've had enough now. It's going to be the West waking up and saying, well, we're not going to buy anything from China. The only response is to put up 100% tariffs like Biden just did on EVs across the board and say, right, we will reindustrialize and we will start to do everything ourselves. But that means no more technology transfer to China, no more investment in China, complete decoupling, and therefore, of course, a complete breakdown stage by stage of trade with China, which will split the entire global economy into different blocks. And every time you start saying that, the West backs off and says, but we love free trade, and starts, trying to go back to old mantras which no longer apply. So the end game is pretty clear if the West wants to actually see what it needs to be. And if it doesn't, China wins.
Right, but the CCP persistently conflates industrial policy with innovation, which is not the same thing.
No, but it won't be in the West either. I mean, we have got innovation in the West, absolutely, in some locations. What was the last thing Australia innovated? Nothing, right? So there is some innovation. It's mainly happening in Silicon Valley and a few other locales. But the issue is, what do you do with it? What's the point of having an innovation if you then don't make it at home? You don't capture that value chain domestically. You just give it to somebody else. Here's the solution to the maths problem. I'll give it to some other kid to get the A in their homework. I'll just sit here smug in the corner. It doesn't make any sense. China doesn't do it like that. And the West eventually will move the same way. But as I said, to understand the totality of what I'm arguing here, you have to understand what the end point is in that particular journey. And they're twofold. Either we carry on the same and China dominates most industrial sectors and eventually moves into things like aeroplanes too. So then at that point, okay, anything you want is going to be made in China. There's no decoupling that can happen. And if that happens, then eventually, of course, China gets to set the standard for everything. The West doesn't. And that will impact on everyone's living standards and way of life over time. That's very clear. The same way that it would happen with any country, by the way, not just China. Same way it happened with America in the past when they were stronger. Or there's going to be a decoupling. which, the likes of Australia in particular, and that's why I'm being pretty blunt saying this, refuse to even contemplate. So those are your two end goals or your two end destinations, and you can sit there trying to straddle both of them as they kind of go off at 90-degree angles to each other, but eventually it's going to rip you in half.
Okay, but large firms and a strong top-down industrial policy don't protect an economy against bad macroeconomic outcomes. And there's no substitute for good macroeconomic governance and well-institutionalized technology ecosystems.
Yeah, and I wish we had some in the West, because we don't. We've got terrible macroeconomic governance and very little innovation.
Right, and China can't say they have the same. How about either?
No, but again, I don't want to keep repeating myself. They're both rotten systems, but it does sound to me, with the greatest respect, Leon, like you're clinging to some view of what the West is, which it isn't. We don't innovate very much. We don't invest hardly at all. And when we do, we just give away the fruits of all of it immediately. So we don't have also good macroeconomic governance. We've got too high inflation. China's got deflation. Now, you might turn around and say, deflation is shocking. I'd love to see a bit of deflation in the West. Wouldn't you like to see consumer goods prices coming down for everything, so people actually got more money in their pocket? Wouldn't you like to have that happen because we're so efficient at producing things again that companies can make a profit while selling things at a lower cost per item? That's how America did things in the 50s and the 60s, and even before that too. Why can't we do that? China is doing that. We've got inflation stuck well above target and interest rates far lower than they should be, because we're afraid to put them where they need to be, because that will hurt homeowners, and we can't do that because they are our sacred cow in the same way that the CCP has its sacred cows.
Well, Michael, that's all quite sobering, and thank you so much again for your time.
You're welcome, Leon, and please don't take it personally, but I think these are important issues. And
I think so too.
I know you have an important audience, and I hope they're listening to this and absorbing it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So what's happening in the news? Well, media mogul Rupert Murdoch is married again, tying the knot for the fifth time at his California vineyard on Saturday. The former Fox and News Corp chairman, 93, married 67-year-old Elena Zhukova after a short engagement. The pair started dating in 2023 and confirmed their plans to wed in the New York Times in March this year. Zhukova, a retired molecular biologist, was introduced to Murdoch by his third wife, Wendy Deng. Moscow native Zhukova was previously married to billionaire Alexander Zhukov. This will be her third marriage. Zhukova is the mother of Daria Zhukova, who was married to Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, the former owner of English Premier League soccer team Chelsea. The wedding took place at Murdoch's exclusive Bel Air vineyard and estate at Moraga. Murdoch purchased the secluded Los Angeles property in 2013. Murdoch stepped down from the top job at News Corp late last year, handing the reins to his eldest son Lachlan. He continues to be involved in the media empire as a chairman emeritus. Despite stepping back from official duties across his media empire, Murdoch is still seen as its figurehead. Last month, Prince Harry failed in his attempt to bring legal action against Murdoch directly as part of his lawsuit with other politicians and celebrities over alleged phone hacking claim against News Group newspapers, part of the News Corp empire which publishes The Sun and used to publish the now-defunct News of the World. Lachlan Murdoch, meanwhile, has been contending with flagging viewership and advertising at local Fox stations through the US presidential primary season, though he expressed confidence they would rise through the general election. The wedding comes amid a difficult time for News Corp's Australian publishing empire, with journalists being informed on Wednesday of a newsroom restructure which is likely to result in more job losses as the company seeks to save up to $65 million. Murdoch is set to visit Australia in July this year to celebrate the 60th anniversary of News Corp masthead The Australian. It will mark his first trip down under since 2018. The Murdoch media empires are controlled through a family trust, meaning the marriage to Zhukova is unlikely to impact the future holdings of both media empires. Upon Murdoch's death, all votes would be transferred to his four eldest children, Prudence, Lachlan, James and Elizabeth. Murdoch has 6 children from his first 3 marriages. It was only in March 2023 that Murdoch was engaged to a different woman, Anne Leslie Smith, before calling off the wedding in April after he reportedly became concerned about Smith's ultra-conservative and evangelist views. And Australia's economy is on the verge of crawling to a standstill, with the nation's March quarter national accounts weaker than expected. GDP slowed to 0.1% on quarter and 1.1% on year from respective growth rates of 0.2% and 1.5% in the December quarter. Growth was slightly below consensus of 0.2% and 1.2%. It's the slowest annual growth rate since the December quarter of 2020. GDP per capita fell for the 5th consecutive quarter, falling 0.4% in March and 1.3% through the year. Excluding population growth, the economy in per capita terms has been flat or in retreat since the start of 2023, as the Reserve Bank's interest rate increases aimed at curbing inflation has squeezed mortgage holders and other borrowers. The year-on-year growth pace was the slowest since the December quarter of 2020, when the economy was mired in the COVID pandemic, the ABS said. And the National Disability Insurance Scheme Integrity Chief says 9 out of 10 plan managers surveyed showed signs of fraud, and the justice system would be overwhelmed if all the scams carried out on the $44 billion program were prosecuted. In fiery testimony, John Dardo told the Senate committee that internal analysis showed 90% of plan managers that wrangle funding for up to 100 participants, about 900 of 1,540 managers in total, portrayed significant indicators of fraud. Further, he added, there were dozens of examples where organised crime groups were abusing the system, including encouraging the use of NDIS money to buy drugs and alcohol. Mr. Dardo also revealed pretty extreme conflicts of interest, such as family members paying each other for care. These are not genuine providers, not people who should be in business, not people who should be allowed near government schemes of any kind, he told the Senate Estimates Committee late Monday night. Asked in Parliament on Tuesday if he was allowing drugs to be trafficked under a scheme he designed, Disability Minister Bill Shorten accused the coalition of failing to properly administer the scheme. I agree that there are issues in terms of fraud in the scheme, but these issues of fraud did not start yesterday, Mr Shorten said, accusing the opposition of naivety. The rapid growth of the scheme is one of the strongest headwinds challenging Treasurer Jim Chalmers' budget. It is consistently growing at more than 20% a year, despite Labor's efforts to rein in its explosive trajectory. In a significant overhaul of how the program is run, last year's review recommended phasing out plan managers over 5 years, signalling the end of a booming sector that emerged to help participants pay invoices and monitor their budgets. But Mr Dardo said more needed to be done, and sooner, to rid the scheme of dodgy operators, meaning both plan managers and providers of care. There are weaknesses in the design of the system that need to be addressed. We cannot prosecute or audit our way out of this, he said. He added stricter laws to help prevent participants from being defrauded by unscrupulous providers were critical to stopping the abuse of some of the society's most vulnerable. Mr Dardo said a very significant number of providers had been found to be selling drugs to participants. Asked which drugs, and if it included heroin, cocaine, speed and ice, Mr Dardo said, you name it, it's on the list. Mr Dardo said he had recently spoken to a participant who would meet their provider at an ATM, where the provider would withdraw cash and provide that cash to the participant for her to source illicit substance. Fraudulent providers peddling drugs were returning even when they had been exposed, he said. They're coming across as a different entity, or they are establishing other providers, or are coming back as an unregistered provider. There is a whole series of patterns. And Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy has conceded the department did not anticipate the post-pandemic surge in migration, blaming the frankly poor forecasting performance to a failure to anticipate a sharp rise in foreign student numbers. Did Treasury get the numbers wrong? Yes. Treasury migration recovered from the pandemic much more rapidly than we anticipated, Dr Kennedy told the Senate. While net arrivals totalled a record 528,400 in the 12 months to June 2023, last year's federal budget underestimated this figure by 24%, Dr Kennedy told the Senate Estimates Committee. That's frankly poor performance on our behalf, Dr Kennedy said. Other countries have faced similar challenges, including New Zealand, where the equivalent forecast was 42% lower than the latest net overseas migration estimate, and the United Kingdom, where the forecast was 58% lower. The record rate of net overseas migration has become a major political issue for the Albanese government, amid community concern over housing affordability and infrastructure pressures. The record migration intake has pushed annual population growth to 2.5%, its highest rate since 1952. But the migration surge is largely a one-off boost caused by international students and temporary workers returning to Australia following the end of their pandemic travel restrictions. The migration story is important because it seems to be the only thing that's stopping Australia falling into a recession with negative GDP growth. Oxford Australia's head of macroeconomic forecasting, Sean Landcake, said that budgetary pain will be tempered in aggregate because population growth is set to remain quite strong. In other words, while individual families are doing it tougher and spending less on goods and services, there are enough new people coming into the economy to ensure growth continues. That should translate into annual GDP growth remaining above 1%, Oxford predicted, which would be well below the 2.1% posted over the year to the September quarter. Opposition leader Peter Dutton pledged last month to cut the permanent migration program by 25% from 185,000 to 140,000 and to get net overseas migration down to 160,000. However, the specifics of how a coalition government would achieve this goal are unclear. and experts say it would require aggressive cuts to student and other temporary visa programs. Treasury expects net overseas migration to decline sharply, falling to 260,000 by June 2025, and then its pre-pandemic average of 235,000 in June 2027, after the government introduces limits on foreign student numbers. Dr. Kennedy said that when Australia reopened its borders, there was a large catch-up in overseas arrivals in a compressed time frame, largely driven by a sharp increase in the number of foreign students. And yoga instructors, martial artists and dog handlers have beaten some construction trades to a spot on the government's draft priority skills list for migrants, despite the dire need for workers to tackle the nation's housing crisis. As the government faces a shortfall of 90,000 construction workers to meet its target of 1.2 million homes by the end of the decade, the latest list of occupations that can be fast-tracked into the country includes wellness professionals, while trades including plumbers, bricklayers and cabinet makers remain under consideration. Parliament is locked in a fierce argument over the role of migration in housing affordability, with a debate over who qualifies for the overseas skills list being fought at the same time as the government strives to drive down the total number of people arriving in Australia while increasing the supply of homes. It follows a stoush between the government and the building sector in December, when tradies were left off a streamlined high-skilled professional visa category amid union calls to ensure Australian jobs were prioritised. Build Skills Australia, which was commissioned by Labor to help solve Australia's housing workforce crisis, said in a submission on the core skills list that boosting the proportion of migrant construction workers would rebalance the effect arrivals had on housing demand. Does the world really need more yoga instructors at this point in time? Build Skills Head of Research Rob Sabira said, "I'm not diminishing the importance of that as an occupation or the validity of it, but from the perspective of our economic priorities in this country, our social and economic priorities, it would seem to us that we should really be prioritising basically any skilled trade." The Albanese government's Jobs and Skills Australia has released 3 draft lists for occupations relating to a new core skills migration stream, those it is confident should be on or off the list, and those requiring more consultation. The new agency has introduced yogis and martial artists on roll call of occupations it is confident will make the list, which also includes electricians, carpenters and joiners and civil engineers. But painters, roof tilers, stonemasons and other tradespeople needed to address the housing crisis have been targeted for consultation. And the Fair Work Commission has warned that stalled productivity and falling profits in the retail and hospitality industries remain barriers to reversing the fall in real wages since the pandemic. The Wage Panel on Monday increased rates in 121 awards by 3.75% from July the 1st to assist 2.6 million minimum award workers with cost of living pressures. It could not justify pay rises significantly above inflation after recognising productivity was weak and jobs and hours were falling in industries hit by lower consumer spending. The pay rise, below the upper end of market expectations, affects about 25% of the workforce, from hospitality workers on up to $66,000 a year to pilots on more than $150,000. Employers said the decision means productivity must be a priority for future wage talks, while some economists predicted it would lead to wage growth slowing down faster than expected. Australia Industry Group Chief Executive Ines Willicks said the decision was moderate, only relative to the ACTU's 5% claim, but still somewhat on the high side. The decision underestimates some of the challenges facing industries doing it tough, he said. More positively, it recognises that real wage rises are only sustainable when aligned with productivity increases. Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry Chief Executive Andrew McKellar, who called for a 2% increase, said the decision was above inflation and would test the acceptable limits for businesses. And company directors would be asked to disclose their sexuality, age, any Indigenous heritage and disabilities under far-reaching updates to the principles governing ASX companies that some board members, company secretaries and investors warn are misguided. Zipco Chair, leading diversity advocate Diane Smith-Gander, said that while Australian boards understood the need for greater diversity, she was concerned it would become a de facto requirement. "I don't support the extension of the guidelines to include rules about the personal characteristics of directors," she said. "I don't think anyone should be compelled to make disclosures about their personal information if they don't want to." Governance Institute Chairman Pauline Vamos said there is a danger that the more prescriptive the principles become, the more they could duplicate or be at odds with other disclosure regimes such as climate risk disclosures or gender reporting. Small companies in particular could find the regime too onerous and start to consider their listed status, she said. The ASX Corporate Governance Council, which is chaired by former Amherst partner Elizabeth Johnson, has received mixed feedback on its proposal to expand reporting on diversity beyond gender, following similar moves in the UK and on the Nasdaq in the US. In its proposed fifth update to corporate governance principles and recommendations, the Council has also called for the current gender target of 30% women on boards to be lifted to 40% and for board skill sets and skills gaps to be audited. Companies would need to report against the new principles by July 2025. Under the listing rules, companies are required to disclose when they fail to conform with the principles and give reasons why, under a framework designed to encourage boards to abide by the guidelines, which does not force them to do so. And business failures, tracking at the highest rate since the aftermath of the global financial crisis, combined with the mortgage and cost of living pressures, are seeing a rapidly rising number of personal insolvencies. And it is expected more Australians will declare bankruptcy in the months ahead as the cost of living crisis continues to bite and business failures trigger a ripple effect through the economy. Figures from the Australian Financial Security Authority show there have been 9,737 personal insolvencies up to April the 30th this financial year, compared with 7,991 during the same period a year ago. The AFSA data showed there were 1,046 people who entered a formal personal insolvency, up from 980 in March. Of the new personal insolvencies, 584 were bankruptcies, 447 were debt agreements, 14 were personal insolvency agreements, and 1 was an insolvent deceased estate. Throughout the period, 248 people who entered a formal personal insolvency were also involved in a business, with that cohort making up 37.2% of all bankruptcies in the month. Figures from the Australian Securities Investment Commission show there have been 8,742 insolvency appointments up to April the 30th in this financial year, compared with 6,200 during the same period a year ago. The current financial year is shaping up to be the highest rate of external administration control appointments since 2011, when 10,757 businesses went under. New South Wales had the most personal insolvencies in April at 306, just as it did with corporate insolvency. Queensland was just behind at 275, followed by Victoria at 196. Western Australia and South Australia had 74 and 69 personal insolvencies respectively, while Tasmania, the Northern Territory, ACT had less than 26. And that's it for this week. And next week I'll be talking to Chris McNamara, the CRO of Remote, and he'll talk about how it is strategically advantageous for businesses to consider remote work as part of their acquisition and retention strategy. And I'll talk to AMP Capital Chief Economist Shane Oliver about Australia's latest inflation figure. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from our website, leongettler.com. If you like Talking Business, please leave us a review with Apple Podcasts. Thank you in advance. In the meantime, you catch me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. If you want to contact me, email me at leon@leongettler.com. I answer all emails. Wishing you all a safe and healthy week and looking forward to bringing Talking Business next week.